Hello, folks, and welcome to another episode of the Dr. Mark Foster Show. This is Mark, and I have my thermos off to the side here in case my mouth dries out because of some of the meds I'm on again. Um, Today I'm going to reprise the subject of critical realism, which is very near and dear to my heart, as those of you who have watched my podcasts over the years know. I was a critical realist for a number of years due to a kind of existential crisis in my life caused by my interactions with a particular individual. I abandoned critical realism for about maybe 7 years. Then I came back to it, and I've never been happier. I'm very pleased to have been a critical realist again for about the last 14 years. Critical realism was developed by the late Roy Bhaskar. Roy Bhaskar died several years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, when he was 70, unfortunately at a very young age. He was not a healthy man, and he had a foot amputated at one point in his life, and he did walk around either with two canes or he was wheeled around in a wheelchair. Unfortunately, I never had the opportunity to meet Roy Bhaskar face to face, although I did have one email exchange with him. That's the only contact I ever had directly with Roy, and I really regret that. I had the chance to meet him about a year before he died, but I passed it up, and I regret that as well, but can't really go back and change that now, so not much that I can do about it. Roy had a very difficult childhood, which is something that I can relate to because I had a difficult childhood as well, although for very different reasons. In my case, my difficult childhood was caused by my autism and the way in which people who were around me, other kids, treated me, but also just because of being an autistic. It is not easy being an autistic, and I regularly pray for a cure for autism. I plead to God with all my heart that there is a cure for autism soon, because I do not want to see anyone go through all the pain and trauma that I went through, especially in my childhood. It wasn't just the bullying from others. It was the stuff that was going on inside my head, things that were very, very difficult to live through. So that was me. With Roy, it was different. As far as I know, Roy had no developmental or psychiatric issues. He was, however, half Indian from India. The other half was English. His mother was English. His father was from India. He was born and raised in London. He also died in London. And because of his Indian ancestry, he was bullied very harshly as a child. And his first name was Ram, which is the name of a legendary Hindu figure associated with the epic poem, the Ramayana. And Roy was called as a child things like, ram it up your ass, and rather just very unfortunate things that children will often do to other children, things that I experienced as well, so I can relate to that. And so Roy experienced that kind of hatred and trauma and alienation from his own being. as did I. And I think, although I don't know this, but I think that that is what drew Roy to Marxism. I know that was the case with me, because in the midst of all the bullying I was experiencing in 1968, when I was only 12 years old, I became a communist, which is kind of early to become a communist. I was a part of the New Left, although I was very youthful, but I very much identified with that. I was a part of an organization called the Students' Democratic Coalition, which was associated with the New Left at that time. It was also connected with the Democratic Party that was back at a time when a lot of communists had hopes that the Democratic Party might become revolutionary, something that no Marxists that I know in the United States have any hopes for anymore. The Democratic Party, if anything, is anti-communist, anti-socialist, and is a very centrist party. I would say in some cases left centrist, and in some cases right centrist. Pardon me while I reach for my thermos of water. Apologies for that. So, as a communist, I was very much attracted to the idea of the elimination of capitalism and the establishment of a communist world system, although my understandings of that were rather limited at 12 years old. But still, that's something that I very deeply wanted and appreciated even at that young age. I really did not identify with any particular communist tendency. I couldn't say that I was a Luxemburgist or a Trotskyist or an autonomist or a Stalinist or anything like that. I drifted into various tendencies later on, ultimately becoming what I am now, which is kind of a fusion of Luxemburgism, autonomism, critical realism, and intersectionality. But back then I really had no specific tendency or current that I was associated with. I was just a simple, plain communist. Communism, as most people see it, is an atheistic movement. Now, I have contended for some time that Karl Marx was not an atheist. Now, I don't know that, but I have never seen any place where Karl Marx denounced or renounced the existence of God. And so, to me, an atheist is somebody who says there is no God. And I've never seen a place where Karl Marx said that. And so, lacking that evidence, I would simply say that I don't know if he is an atheist, and therefore I would assume that he was not. What Marx did say, however, is that religion is the opium of the people, or of the masses, depending upon the translator. Now, what is opium? Well, opium is a kind of depressant. It's a downer. People who take opium take it as a painkiller. It takes away not only physical pain, but it takes away emotional or psychological pain as well. And so what Marx was saying is that religion had become a way in which people would take away their pains that they were experiencing through capitalism, but not effectively dealing with them. For example, under slavery, some slave owners in the United States, or what later became the United States, would encourage their slaves to take part in church activities, what was the black church, and what still is the black church. And the idea being was that if slaves were involved in religion, if they were Christians, then they might think to themselves, well, I am suffering here. I am in a really bad condition. I am a slave. But Jesus suffered too. Jesus was crucified on the cross, and yet he survived it all. He didn't complain that much until at the very end, when he was on the cross, he reportedly said, "If it be your will, take this away from me, but your will, not mine, be done." So he suffered, and he suffered willingly. He agreed to suffer, to take away the sins of the world. That was the sacrifice that Jesus made through his death on the cross. So if a slave would relate to the crucifixion and think, well, just like Jesus suffered, I am suffering too. I may not be suffering as much as Jesus did, but I have no freedom. I'm forced to work without pay. I'm forced to live in very substandard conditions. But I know that when I die, I will be rewarded by God, and I will go to heaven. So what Marx, I think, was saying was that is in effect what religions, some religions, obviously Marx was not an expert on religion. He wasn't aware of every religion that existed in the world. He was talking about the religions and his experiences. Primarily Protestantism. He was born and raised in Germany, where the Lutheran Church is dominant. Then he spent the second part of his life in England, where the Anglican Church is dominant. So that was his primary connection with religion. So he was talking, I think, primarily about Christianity. And he was saying that Christianity can be like an opium, to make people forget their pains and instead think to themselves, well, in spite of my suffering, I am going to survive, and I am going to struggle to lead a good life so that when I die, I can be united with my relatives and draw close to God. What Marx was saying is that kind of an attitude was problematic, because feeling that way was basically a way of empowering the plantation owners. It was a way in which the plantation owners were manipulating the slaves, in effect taking a piece of the mind of the slaves, getting into the slave's head, controlling the slave's thoughts, making the slaves say, well, I don't need to struggle against this oppressive condition of slavery, which Marx regarded as a type of capitalism for no pay at all. And I can just wait until I die and receive my reward in heaven. So I think, if anything, one might say that Marx was, to use a modern term, an apatheist. The term apatheist is a coined term. It is a portmanteau, or a combination of two words, apathy and atheism. It's basically saying, so if you ask a person, do you believe in God? An apatheist will say, I don't care. I don't care. I'm apathetic. I don't care whether God exists. So it appears to me that, at best, we can say that Karl Marx was an apatheist. He certainly was not a very religious man. Whether he believed in God, I don't know. I have no reason to think he did. I have no reason to think that he did not. But God was certainly not a major part of his life. Pardon me again while I take another sip of water. I wish I didn't have to do that, but so be it. When Roy Bhaskar came along, the founder of Critical Realism, Roy Bhaskar was initially an atheist. His parents were not, but he was. But then, beginning in the late 1990s, Roy began taking trips to India, in effect trying to discover his heritage, his father's heritage. And he traveled all around the country, gave radio interviews, met various spiritual leaders. And when he came back to England, he was a changed man. He took his philosophy of critical realism and developed it into a higher turn or a higher stage, which he called the philosophy of metaReality, which he referred to as an understanding of the realization of something that he called the cosmic envelope. He also called it non-duality, which is based on the Sanskrit term Advaita, which is non-duality. And he had a very strong affection for Sanskara, who was the founder of the Advaitic school in Hinduism. And his idea was that this notion of non-dualism, this notion of unity, in effect, the unity of existence, this is the highest level of reality, the highest level of critical realism, and that we can reach this world, he said, through meditation, through contemplation, and to use a technical term, through what he called phenomenological analysis. He didn't coin that term, but he used it. Phenomenology is an approach to philosophy which was developed in the early 20th century by Edmund Husserl, German philosopher. And the idea of phenomenology is basically that you try to simply absent your belief in the existence of the objective world, meaning you say to yourself, for the time being, I will believe that there is no objective world. And then you try to understand another person. You try to relate to the person beneath outward appearances. To Husserl, that was the ultimate in good relationships, going beyond outward appearances, trying to understand the inward being of another person. Roy Bhaskar saw that as a way in which we could understand this thing called the cosmic envelope. To Roy, the cosmic envelope, non-duality or co-presence or the ground state, all terms for approximately the same condition, were alternatives to the current condition or reality of demi-reality which exists in the world today. We see it right now in the worldwide response, especially the U.S. response to COVID-19. Totally haphazard, totally disunified, being run by an administrator or president who apparently cares for nobody else except himself. And as a result, the United States has the highest rate of COVID-19 in the world, by far, by far. Russia is right behind the United States, but considerably behind, but they come right after the United States. And so what Bhaskar felt was that if we do not eventually reach this condition of co-presence, meaning living in a world of complete unity, which to Bhaskar was not a simple change of consciousness. Roy was not an idealist or a Platonist. Roy was a realist. To Roy, the cosmic envelope was a real condition, a real state of being, a reality. And so what Roy said, if we don't reach this, and Roy was somewhat pessimistic whether we would. The result is that we might very well end up destroying ourselves. And it appears to me as though we are on track to do just that. Because I don't think that we have done the kinds of things that Roy hoped that we would. Roy spent the last few years of his life engaged in peace research, applying critical realism and metaReality to peace, looking for ways in which we could establish a peaceful society, or what he called a concrete utopia, a term he did not coin but which he used regularly. And he felt that if we can do that, if somehow we can discover a way to live in such a concrete utopia, meaning a practical kind of world in which people are living in this condition of the cosmic envelope or co-presence, then we might overcome all of the distractions, the alienation, the poverty, the oppression, the racism, the sexism, and especially the capitalism and the entire system of classism and class oppression, totally eliminating the class system. We might do that, but we might not as well. And so essentially to Roy, it's up to us. It begins with each one of us. For me, it begins with me. For you, it begins with you. But it doesn't end with me, and it doesn't end with you. We can join together. And as Marx talked about struggling for communism, this was Roy's view of a kind of spiritualized communism. We can struggle for this kind of communistic society, this libertarian communism, a communism of true liberty. Roy was a libertarian communist, libertarian Marxist, as am I. And if we are successful, that would be great. If not, well, we have only ourselves to blame. That concludes this broadcast of the Dr. Mark Foster Show. This is Mark signing off. Have a good one.